Daniel.
What's going? Hold on. Watch it.
Take your seatbelt off and get out of the car. Get out of the car now!
Please, look. This is really messed up.
A decorated black U.S. Army lieutenant stopped in uniform, pepper-sprayed without warning. What happened next shook a nation, sparked protests, and exposed the truth behind a broken system. The hum of the road stretched endlessly as Lieutenant Andre Williams guided his car through the quiet streets of Albuquerque, New Mexico. His shift had ended hours ago, and the pull of home was strong. Wearing his neatly pressed U.S. Army uniform, Andre had just returned from a base meeting that ran late. The rhythmic flicker of streetlights overhead cast a soft glow on the dashboard. As he approached a stoplight, the unmistakable flash of red and blue lights lit up his rearview mirror. Andre sighed, pulling over to the side of the road. His hands instinctively went to the steering wheel, fingers spread, as he thought back to the countless lessons his father taught him about staying calm during police interactions. Even as a soldier, these teachings were never far from his mind. The officer approached briskly, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Andre rolled down his window just enough to hear the voice on the other side. "License and registration," the officer barked, his tone sharp, almost hostile. "Yes, sir," Andre replied evenly, his voice calm, though his heart beat faster. He reached toward the glove compartment, narrating each movement aloud. "I'm getting my registration from here and my wallet is in my pocket." The officer's flashlight didn't move, trained firmly on Andre's face. "What's a guy like you driving this kind of car for?" The officer sneered, eyeing Andre's new sedan. Andre stiffened but said nothing, his training kicking in. When Andre handed over his documents, the officer leaned closer. "Step out of the vehicle." Confusion flickered across Andre's face. "Sir, is there a reason for this request?" The officer's jaw clenched as he repeated, louder this time, "I said step out of the vehicle." Andre unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door slowly, careful to keep his hands visible. His boots hit the pavement as he stood to his full height, towering over the officer. Even with his uniform on, even with his composure intact, there was no mistaking the tension crackling in the air. Suddenly, the officer's hand moved to his belt, pulling out a canister. Before Andre could utter another word, the officer unleashed a blast of pepper spray directly into his face. Pain seared through his eyes, and Andre stumbled backward, coughing and gasping, his hands instinctively covering his face. "Why are you doing this?" Andre choked out, his voice hoarse and strained. "Stop resisting!" the officer yelled, though Andre hadn't moved aggressively or made any sudden motions. He fell to his knees, disoriented and vulnerable. From the corner of his stinging eyes, Andre noticed car windows rolling down. Bystanders started recording, their shocked voices carrying over the night air. "Hey! He's not doing anything. He's in uniform, for God's sake." Andre's mind swirled with pain and disbelief. He couldn't see clearly, but he could feel the weight of every onlooker's gaze and hear the murmurs spreading through the small crowd. This wasn't just a routine stop anymore. It was something far bigger, and it was happening to him. As the officer placed handcuffs on Andre, a voice from the crowd yelled, "We're getting this on video, man. You're not getting away with this." Even through the chaos, those words planted a seed of hope amidst the despair. This wasn't over. What should have been a straightforward interaction had become a nightmare. Yet this was only the beginning. The consequences of that night would ripple far beyond anything Andre could imagine. Andre sat on the cold pavement, his eyes burning and his vision still blurred. The officer's grip on his arm was firm as he forced him toward the patrol car. Despite the physical pain, it was the weight of humiliation that stung the most. A decorated U.S. Army lieutenant, treated like a criminal in front of strangers. His chest tightened as the gravity of the situation sank in. The crowd was growing. People stepped out of their cars, some shouting questions at the officer, others holding their phones high to capture the unfolding scene. A woman's voice cut through the commotion, trembling with outrage. "Why are you arresting him? He didn't do anything wrong." The officer ignored her, pressing Andre against the hood of the car as he fumbled with his radio. The murmurs turned into angry shouts, a mix of confusion and fury swelling in the air. A second patrol car arrived, and another officer stepped out, his expression shifting as he took in the scene. He looked at Andre, his uniform unmistakable, and then at his partner, whose face was flushed with adrenaline. "What's going on here?" he asked sharply. The first officer didn't respond, continuing to tighten Andre's handcuffs. Andre, finally catching his breath, managed to speak, his voice cracking. "I'm a lieutenant in the U.S. Army. I complied with every order. I need medical attention. He pepper-sprayed me for no reason." The second officer hesitated, glancing toward the crowd, where voices were growing louder. "You sprayed him? Was he resisting?" "He wasn't resisting," someone from the crowd yelled before the first officer could answer. "We've got it all on video." Another voice chimed in. "He asked why he needed to get out of the car. That's it." The second officer's face tightened. He reached for his radio and called for a supervisor. "We need backup here," he said curtly. Andre was finally allowed to sit upright, though the cuffs remained cutting into his wrists. His eyes burned, but he forced them open just enough to meet the gaze of the second officer. "You don't have to believe me," Andre said, his voice steadier now. "Just watch the footage." The tension thickened as the first officer's bravado faltered. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that the situation was spiraling out of his control. The arrival of the supervisor only added to the pressure. A commanding voice demanded an explanation, and Andre felt a flicker of relief as the crowd shouted their version of events louder than the first officer could defend himself. Within minutes, the lieutenant was released from the cuffs, but the damage had already been done. His uniform was wrinkled, his dignity bruised, and the pepper spray still stung his skin. He sat on the curb, refusing medical attention until he could call someone he trusted. "This isn't over," he murmured to himself, more determined than ever. As he stood to leave, the woman who had shouted earlier approached cautiously. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said, holding out a bottle of water. "We've got your back. A lot of us recorded everything." Andre nodded his thanks, the faintest glimmer of gratitude breaking through his anger. He didn't have to fight this alone. By morning, the videos were already flooding social media. Andre's story was no longer just his. It was a rallying cry for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. But the battle ahead would test his strength in ways he never imagined. Andre woke the next morning to a flurry of phone notifications. Texts, calls, and social media alerts piled up, as though the world had erupted overnight. As he rubbed his swollen eyes, his phone rang again. This time, it was his commanding officer. "Lieutenant Williams," the familiar voice began, firm yet cautious. "I saw the video. We'll need to address this officially. Are you okay?" Andre hesitated. Physically, he'd recover, but the weight of what had happened lingered like an ache in his chest. "I'm managing, sir, but it's bigger than me." The commanding officer agreed, assuring Andre that the military would stand by him. But as the call ended, Andre couldn't shake the nagging thought. Would they really stand by him, or was this about optics? Within hours, the video had gone viral. News outlets picked up the footage, analyzing every second with captions like, "Black Army Lieutenant pepper-sprayed in traffic stop," and "Routine stop sparks outrage." Hashtags surged. "Justice for Lieutenant Williams." "Accountability." Now, #enough is enough. Support flooded in from unexpected places. Veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and even public figures spoke out. "A decorated soldier in uniform treated this way," one news anchor exclaimed. "What does this say about how we value those who serve?" But not everyone was on Andre's side. Social media buzzed with debates. Some blamed him, questioning why he hadn't just complied. Others argued it didn't matter. No one deserved to be treated that way, especially without provocation. The polarization was overwhelming. Andre stayed silent for the first day, watching the chaos unfold. His name was everywhere, his face on every screen. The woman who had recorded the clearest footage, a local teacher named Bianca, reached out. "I've been getting calls from reporters," she said. "I just want you to know, I'm willing to testify if it comes to that." Her words carried more weight than she realized. Bianca wasn't just a bystander, she was a witness, one whose voice could pierce through the noise. "Thank you," Andre said, his voice heavy with gratitude. "Your courage means everything." Meanwhile, the police department issued a statement. It was brief and clinical, claiming they were reviewing the incident. The first officer was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. But for many, this felt like too little, too late. Protests began to form outside the department, placards reading "Justice for Andre" and "End Police Brutality." Through it all, Andre remained quiet, unsure of how to step into a role he hadn't asked for. Yet, as the days passed, one thing became clear. This was no longer just his fight. It was a battle for everyone who had ever been silenced, dismissed, or dehumanized. One evening, as he sat alone in his small apartment, Andre scrolled through his messages. Among them was one that stood out. A letter from a young boy. "Dear Lieutenant Williams," it read in messy handwriting. "I'm proud of you. My dad says you're a hero." Andre stared at the screen, the words blurring as tears filled his eyes. Hero? He didn't feel like one. But if this was what being a hero meant, standing up even when it hurt, then he knew what he had to do. The groundswell of support pushed Andre to the forefront of a growing movement. But the deeper the public dug, the more they uncovered, and the darker the truths they unearthed became. The media storm surrounding Andre's case put the Albuquerque Police Department under intense scrutiny. Investigative journalists began digging into the officer who pepper-sprayed Andre, unearthing a troubling history. Complaints about excessive force and discriminatory behavior had been filed against him before, cases swept under the rug with no real consequences. Andre sat in a small meeting room with his attorney, Rebecca Lawson, a sharp and seasoned civil rights lawyer who had taken on cases like this before. "They're trying to frame this as an isolated incident," Rebecca said, sliding a stack of documents across the table. "But it's not. This officer has a pattern, and so does this department." The papers detailed other traffic stops, other complaints, all eerily similar to what Andre had experienced. Andre felt a surge of anger and disbelief. "How does someone like that stay on the force?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Rebecca sighed. "It's the system, Andre. And now we have a chance to expose it." The investigation into the department went beyond the single officer. Anonymous sources within the force began leaking damning information to the press, allegations of racial profiling, cover-ups, and a culture of protecting their own. The public pressure was relentless, with protests outside the department growing larger each day. One night, Bianca, the teacher who had recorded the incident, joined Andre for an interview with a major news network. Her voice was steady, her conviction clear. "I recorded that night because it felt wrong. What I saw wasn't just one officer abusing his power. It was a system failing the very people it's supposed to protect." Andre listened, humbled by her bravery. As the interview aired, he received messages from people across the country, black soldiers sharing their own experiences of discrimination, veterans offering solidarity, and families thanking him for speaking out. Behind the scenes, Rebecca worked tirelessly. She filed a lawsuit against the city and the police department, citing not only Andre's case, but the broader pattern of misconduct. The legal battle was just beginning, but it was clear the department was on the defensive. Meanwhile, the officer who pepper-sprayed Andre broke his silence. In a televised interview, he claimed he felt threatened during the stop, despite the video evidence showing otherwise. His words only fueled the public outrage. "Threatened by a man sitting in uniform with his hands visible?" one commentator remarked. "This excuse doesn't hold water." Amid the chaos, Andre found himself grappling with a mix of emotions. He wanted justice, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been silenced or ignored. But the weight of being a symbol for change was heavy. His life had been turned upside down, and there were moments when he longed for the quiet anonymity he once had. But every time doubt crept in, he thought about the young boy's letter. He thought about Bianca, who had risked her safety to stand by him, and he thought about the countless voices that had been silenced before him. He couldn't give up. Not now. The deeper the investigation went, the clearer it became that this was more than one bad cop. As the legal battle heated up, the truth about the system's flaws came to light, pushing Andre toward a moment of reckoning that would change everything. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled, and the air buzzed with quiet anticipation. Cameras lined the back wall, their lenses trained on Andre as he sat at the plaintiff's table with Rebecca by his side. His military uniform was sharp, a silent reminder of the honor and service that had been overshadowed by that fateful night. The city's attorney opened with a predictable defense, painting the officer's actions as a split-second decision made under the guise of public safety. But Rebecca was ready. She methodically dismantled their narrative, using the video evidence, the officer's history, and testimonies from other victims to paint a damning picture of systemic failure. Bianca took the stand first, her voice steady as she described what she had seen. He was calm, respectful. He didn't resist at all. What the officer did wasn't just excessive. It was cruel. Other witnesses followed, including experts who spoke about racial profiling and bias within law enforcement. Each testimony felt like a blow to the defense's crumbling case. When it was Andre's turn to testify, he stood tall, his voice unwavering despite the weight of the moment. He described the events of that night in vivid detail, recounting the pain, humiliation, and disbelief he felt as the officer pepper-sprayed him. "I wear this uniform to serve my country," Andre said, his gaze sweeping the room, "to protect the freedoms we all hold dear. But that night, I wasn't treated like a soldier, or even like a citizen. I was treated like a threat, simply because of who I am." The room fell silent. Even the jurors seemed moved by his words. The defense tried to push back, questioning Andre's actions during the stop. "Why didn't you get out of the car immediately when ordered?" the city's attorney asked, her tone sharp. Andre met her gaze, calm but firm. "Because I've seen what happens when black men make sudden movements during traffic stops. I wanted to make sure I lived to see another day." The defense had no answer for that. As the trial went on, Rebecca revealed shocking new evidence. Internal emails from the department discussing how to handle the media fallout. One email in particular stood out. A senior officer suggesting they discredit Andre by digging into his personal life. The jury's reaction was palpable. The room buzzed with murmurs of outrage. The trial lasted weeks, each day more grueling than the last. But Andre's resolve never wavered. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about sending a message that would ripple far beyond Albuquerque. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom was packed once again. The jury found the city and the officer liable, awarding Andre both damages and a public apology. But more importantly, the case prompted sweeping changes within the department, including mandatory bias training, a civilian oversight board, and the firing of several high-ranking officers involved in the cover-up. Justice had been served. But for Andre, the journey wasn't over. The verdict marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where he would use his voice to fight for others who couldn't fight for themselves. Months after the trial, Andre found himself standing in front of a packed auditorium at Howard University, invited as a keynote speaker for a panel on systemic injustice and accountability. The applause was deafening as he stepped to the podium, his military uniform shining under the stage lights. This time, it wasn't just about him. It was about the movement he had inadvertently sparked. Looking out at the sea of faces, students, activists, veterans, and community leaders, Andre felt a surge of pride. These were the people who had stood by him, who had amplified his voice when it felt like he couldn't go on. "I didn't ask to be here," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "That night could have broken me. It could have silenced me. But instead, it lit a fire. Not just in me, but in all of you. This fight is bigger than one traffic stop, one trial, or one verdict. It's about rewriting the story for everyone who's ever been told they don't matter." The room was silent, hanging on his every word. He continued, recounting the lessons he had learned. The power of community, the importance of standing up even when it's hard, and the courage to face systems designed to wear you down. He spoke about Bianca's bravery, Rebecca's tireless dedication, and the countless voices that had joined him along the way. "I learned something important," Andre said, pausing to let the weight of his words settle. "Injustice thrives in silence. But when we speak up, when we come together, we become unstoppable." The crowd erupted into applause. But Andre wasn't finished. "This isn't the end of the story," he added, his voice rising above the clapping. "It's just the beginning. We still have work to do, to hold people accountable, to change systems, and to make sure that no one else has to endure what I went through. But I believe in us. I believe in the power of people united for a cause." As he stepped away from the podium, the applause thundered through the hall, echoing the sentiment of a movement that was far from over. Andre knew his life had changed forever. He was no longer just Lieutenant Andre Williams. He was a symbol of resilience and hope. Later that night, Andre sat in his quiet apartment, scrolling through emails and messages of gratitude. One stood out, a simple note from a woman who had watched his story unfold on the news. It read, "You gave me hope for my son's future. Thank you for fighting." Andre smiled, setting his phone aside. The road ahead was long, but for the first time it felt manageable. He had faced the storm and emerged stronger, not just for himself, but for the countless others who looked to him for inspiration. Andre's journey reminds us that silence enables injustice, but courage and community can spark change. His story wasn't just about one man's fight. It was about the power of standing together against systems of oppression. No matter how daunting the challenge, even a single voice can ignite a movement. Stories like Andre's are happening every day, often without the spotlight they deserve. Let's continue to share, support, and stand up for what's right. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for more stories that inspire change.